This is For the Rest of Us with the Reverend Canon Megan Castellan, a podcast about life, faith, theology, and the Bible, for the rest of us. Well, hello there, you amazing animals. I don't know what that means, but hi, welcome to For the Rest of Us with the Reverend Canon Megan Castellan. Yeah, gang, it's still just me. I'm not the Reverend Canon Megan Castellan. I'm still just Adam Eichelberger. I work with Megan at the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York. I'm a lifelong Catholic, and yeah, I'm an Episcopalian, gang. I'm just gonna say it. I'm finally pulling the trigger. Just an Episcopalian. No more qualifiers to that. And I'm just trying to kind of figure this all out and asking for Megan's help. And hopefully you're getting some help with it too. You can kind of think of it like Megan is my Dr. Cox.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong.
And I am JD.
Eagle!
And I realized I can't do this all on my own.
I'm no Superman. I'm no Superman.
And Megan's going to help me out with all of this. So, Megan, we were talking about what we were going to discuss on the podcast this episode, and there is a lot going on, and we figured we would dive into it. So buckle up, set the table for all of us, because this is kind of a big one, gang. What are we talking about this episode of For the Rest of Us?
Yep. We had a good run, my friends. Our dedicated attempt to not be a bummer has come to a sudden and inevitable conclusion. But I want you to know that it was not us entirely. It was mostly global events.
This was thrust upon us.
This bummerdom was thrust upon us. Last Saturday, President Trump, this is going to timestamp us a little bit, President Trump began to bomb Iran in coordination with Israel. In retaliation, Israel returned fire, bombing Israel-Palestine, as well as all of the surrounding Gulf countries that had known American or Israeli bases or basically had anything to do with anything. So as of right now, countries like Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Lebanon, Syria, Qatar, Kuwait, kind of everybody are all being bombed to some degree or another. And everybody is now involved in the conflict. The Straits of Hormuz, where all of the oil goes through, is closed to shipping traffic. It's a big, giant mess. People are stuck. People can't get out. People are in bomb shelters. The American government has denied that this is a war. So I just want to name that. For the purposes of this conversation, however, it's going to be easier to refer to this military conflict as a war because it does basically fit the colloquial definition of one. And saying extended military style conflict is just a lot to repeat.
Also, if not war, why war-shaped?
If not war, why war-shaped? And the reason we're talking about this is because a lot of the language that was quickly used around the war feels fairly religious. There was a story that was reported the day everything started that said that several military leaders told their direct reports that we were bombing Iran so Jesus would come back, that this would speed up the second coming. The sourcing for those stories seems now pretty thin. They're being pulled back a little bit, but I wanted to talk about it anyway because this sort of apocalyptic discourse spins up whenever there's a war in this part of the world. There is a not tiny group of people who really, truly believe that the way to get Jesus to return is through specific human actions, most of them being kill a lot of other people type actions. And you hear this kind of apocalyptic, violent imagery, particularly around wars in the Middle East. So, all that being said, let's talk about it. So our story begins with Genesis 15. In Genesis 15, it's one of the first places where God is establishing the covenant with Abraham. This is the covenant ceremony. So this is where Abraham takes all of the livestock and splits them in two, and the fire passes between the chopped up animals. And God promises Abraham unconditionally descendants, more than the sands of the seashore, and land. These are the two elements of the covenant. Very big deal. And at the end of this chapter, God defines the land in a very specific way. God says he will give Abraham's descendants everything from the great river of Egypt to the great river of the Euphrates. So take a moment and do some geography. That's a lot of land, lots of stuff in there. And if you're thinking about current geography, several major nation states currently occupy that particular swath. The Nile being in Egypt, the Euphrates now occupying Iraq. And we can tell more or less that Genesis 15 would happen somewhere around the Dead Sea. Abraham's just had a run-in with some other tribal kings, and some stuff has happened, and he's probably up in the Judean desert, bopping around the Red Sea. So this is one of the places that begins an expectation and an understanding of the land that is promised to the Israelites as being this vast territory. Elsewhere, God is going to again promise the land. God reiterates his promise of descendants and land several times. Mostly God is not specific, God not being a real estate agent. And every time God promises land, the boundaries change a bit. So other times, like in Exodus 23:31, God describes the land as the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines. So that's the Mediterranean Sea. And the wilderness is probably the Negev Desert, Sinai Desert, to the Euphrates River. So we're back in Iraq. Smaller footprint, still a couple of nation states. Other verses just talk about the land of Canaan, which is sort of a vague geographical region, but again, we're in more or less this blob of the ancient Near East. Non-specific, somewhat vague, but what I want to convey is that every time God makes this promise of land, which is hugely important, the boundaries sort of shift. So if we fast forward several millennia, Babylonian exile happens, advent of modern nation states happen, the coming of colonialism, everyone is sad, the intrusion of Western powers upon this region of the world, Sykes-Picot Agreement happens, everyone gets really sad. Something else starts up, and that is the political Zionism movement. And I'm going to put a big asterisk right here. Zionism is a really hotly debated word right now. For the purposes of this podcast and this discussion, we're going to define Zionism very tightly. Zionism is going to be strictly confined to the political movement emerging in the 19th century in a European context that is dedicated to establishing a nation state for the Jewish people. That's what we're understanding Zionism to be. So for the purposes of this conversation, when I say Zionist, that is what I mean. The first Zionist leaders, people like Theodor Herzl, coming out of Hungary and Germany and France, had a lot of conversations about if they're going to establish a homeland for the Jewish people, if they're going to establish their own society, where should it be? They talked about a number of different places, Argentina, Kenya, Uganda, but ultimately Theodor Herzl settled on the territory of what was then called Palestine and governed by the Ottomans because, he specifically said, of this biblical resonance. He said it was once our homeland, it can be our homeland again, and this resonance will make people come and support us. At the time, political Zionism was a secular movement. Most Jewish people in the 19th and early 20th century who were religious and who were observant did not think that it was a fantastic idea to be trying to set up their own nation state. They thought that the job of establishing a kingdom was the Messiah's. And if you were going to jump in line, that was probably not going to end up well for you. Part of the motivation for Herzl and the others to go back to Palestine was, he said, it would inspire unity. It would inspire the religious element of Judaism, not just the secular Jews who had assimilated or been on the road to assimilation, but it would inspire people who were religious and who were observant to come to Palestine as well. And he thought it would also earn the support of the world's Christians because they had the same prophecies and they saw the same thing. And if we read the Gospels, we hear kind of hints of this expectation that establishing a utopian Jewish kingdom in the Promised Land is something that the Messiah does when the Messiah comes back. It's why the disciples are always on Jesus about which one of us is going to sit at your right hand when you come to rule, who's going to be the greatest. I'm glad that you are back from the dead. That's fantastic. Okay, when are you going to kick out the Romans, though? It was sort of common knowledge, common understanding in Judaism through the first part of the 20th century that this is the Messiah's job. And it's going to be really great. When the new dawn comes, when the lion lies down with the lamb, when the wolf eats straw like the sheep, all that great Isaiah stuff, it's going to be fantastic when this is established. We just have to wait for it. But time goes by, World War II happens, lots of awful things happen. for various reasons, the Western powers of the world decide that they do want to support a Jewish homeland in what became British-mandated Palestine. And it begins to appear to both Jews and Christians that Israel's survival and continued existence, maybe it is like a nice prophecy working out, maybe not. It's worth saying that Herzl and the other early political leaders were pretty canny about European anti-Semitism. They considered anti-Semitism to be kind of sui generis, which is to say, they considered it to be a sort of hatred that couldn't be reasoned away, couldn't be obliterated, and so the only thing to do about it was to either thwart it or play into it by establishing your own homeland that was so secure no one can come against you anymore. And so part of the resonance that they were looking for was to explain to Christian leaders, are the Jews bothering you? Have I got a solution for you? Wouldn't you like to fulfill biblical prophecy and help your Jewish citizens establish their homeland far away from you so you no longer have to live next to them? I have the perfect solution for you. And so we see in Herzl's writing that part of what he was counting on was both that Christian leaders would see this as fulfillment of their prophecy as well, and that Christians would kind of jump at the chance to push their local Jews out to somewhere else.
That seems kind of gross to play into anti-Semitism to get what you want. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, it is gross. And also, I think we need to reckon with the fact that he comes out of a Europe that is blatantly anti-Semitic, just like was refusing citizenship to people who were Jewish. He witnessed the Dreyfus Affair in France. There were mobs in the streets chanting death to Jews from his account and from other accounts. He was watching pogroms go down in Russia. He and his cohorts were trying to understand that if they were assimilating and trying to participate as much as they could in the life of their European countries, why was there still this kind of core of deep hatred that emerged whenever something went wrong? And so I want to kind of extend him some grace in that he was trying to figure out a way to deal with this question. And this is the way he found to do it, was to kind of use anti-Semitism against the people that were trying to obliterate him and his people. The years go by, and as the nation state of Israel kind of is established by the UN in 48, wins the War of Independence, expands its territory in the 48 war, expands again in the 67 war, expands its borders, expands again in the 73 conquest, gets the Sinai Peninsula and holds the Golan Heights, takes it from Syria. Again, they start to build support among Jewish religious leaders who start to come around to the idea, okay, maybe we are establishing the new society now. And importantly, evangelical Christian leaders. American support for Israel did not coalesce until after the 67 war. And in the 73 war, once Israel won that, American support really solidified. And when Reagan won the White House in the 80s, with the growth of televangelists and the conservative Christian lobby, this is really important for American support for Israel because it's going to coalesce in a very specific way. So you get all of these things coming together, but again, they're all going to support the security decisions of Israel for extremely different reasons. For mainstream, I'm talking reform and kind of little c conservative Jewish leaders now, it becomes a different thing to argue against, maybe it's not great that we have a nation state when said nation state now controls your holy city and you can go and worship at the site of the temple that you've read about in the Bible, in the place of your ancestors, where your ancestors were exiled from. That is a really powerful thing. And when I've gone to Israel, I've talked to observant Israeli Jews who would identify as left-wing, but all of them talk about the power of being able to go to the Western Wall and pray and seeing that site controlled again by Judaism and how that's just an incredible thing and that you can't really undersell how motivating that is for people. At the same time, when that happened, leaders of Israel were aware that the city of Jerusalem and the specific holy site of the Western Wall and the Temple Mount also mattered to other people and mattered to other nations. And other people had strong feelings about it. While it was great for Israeli Jews to worship at the Western Wall, and that was really important to them, it's also the third holiest site in Islam. On top of the Temple Mount is Al-Aqsa, which is where the Prophet Muhammad went when he did his night journey in the Quran. There's a big gold dome shrine on top of it. There's a nice little mosque. And so in 1967, even though Israel claimed to annex the whole city, which is not recognized under international law, they did it anyway. The rabbis in power declared that it was illegal for any observant Jew to go onto the Temple Mount. So we have this holy site. It's very nice, but no one can go there ever. And their reasoning for this is that everyone now is ritually unclean because between the burning of the Second Temple in 70 CE and now everybody has become contaminated with death. We've all touched some dead thing, been around some dead thing, and that contamination has been passed on from our ancestors. And until we are ritually purified with the ashes of a pure red young heifer, until those rites have been carried out, no observant Jewish person is allowed to go into Al-Aqsa and pray. And we cannot rebuild the temple. And so control over Al-Aqsa is in the hands of Jordanian religious police to this day. There are big signs as you go in that say entrance is forbidden by order of Israel's chief rabbinate for observant Jews. And this was sort of to keep the peace in Dodge. In a lot of ways, the Temple Mount is a microcosm of the whole situation. So if you go to the Western Wall or the Kotel, there's the Western Wall down below, which was basically a retaining wall for the Second Temple. And then there's a ramp that goes on top of the Western Wall that you take to go up onto Al-Aqsa. And that's where the Temple Mount was and the Holy of Holies. So that's what the original agreement was. Problem was, not everybody thought this agreement was okay, because it rested on the idea that we care deeply about this place of worship, but so do other people, and they count too. On the Christian side of things, perhaps the most consistent and devout source of support for an expanding, really aggressive Israel has been conservative evangelicals. Because if you are a person who takes the Bible literally, word for word, literally, then you're going to read Genesis 15 and say, oh, well, God gave all that land to Abraham and his descendants. Lebanon is not Abraham's descendant, and Iran is not Abraham's descendant. Israel definitely is. So if Israel wants that land, Israel should take that land. And if you watch Israel win wars, you are going to start to think everything is lining up. This is great. And maybe you start to think, well, I can start to move these pieces on the chessboard myself and make a situation where all the prophecies come true and Jesus comes back.
Which also, not to interrupt, but it sounds a little problematic based on what you said earlier. Like, this is not our job to do, but now we are trying to accelerate that, which it kind of looks like there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what this is actually supposed to be.
Yeah. I mean, the fundamentalist understanding really on both sides is that when you have all the prophecies fulfilled, Messiah comes back. But they're coming at it from very different directions. And there is also an accelerationist aspect, again, on both sides. And I think actually our evangelical Christian culture contributed to the growth of the right-wing zealot culture in Israel that definitely grew in strength, but after ours did, this accelerationist idea that, well, okay, technically speaking, if you really took things literally, we would not be doing these things, but it's really more important to get what we want than to follow the letter of the law. One of the things that's happened in recent years, just since I've been going to Jerusalem, is that when I first went in 2004, hardly any Israelis went to Al-Aqsa. Strictly forbidden. Could not do it. Now, tons of far-right religious settlers are allowed in each day under Israeli military guard, and they perform religious rituals to consecrate the site and prepare it for the building of the Third Temple, which makes everybody super mad and super tense. The Jordanians get super irritated by it. The Palestinians get super irritated by it, but it's been happening more and more. And part of the growth of that form of far-right Jewish extremism in Israel, I think, has come from our evangelical Christian culture of, okay, technically, if we read the Bible literally, we would not be kicking poor people off Medicare or refusing to welcome the refugee. But what we really want is this. And so we're going to kind of like massage what we believe to get us there, because now we have power, and that is becoming the most important thing, because they do feed off of each other. In 1983, an Orthodox rabbi in the US founded the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, which was dedicated to encouraging unconditional support for Israel among evangelical Christians. This group started out mostly working with televangelists. So Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, going on their television shows and explaining why it was the fundamental duty of conservative Christians to stand with Israel as a matter of biblical faithfulness. Primarily, what they started out doing is funding Jews who wanted to permanently move to Israel. So if you've ever watched Pat Robertson at like 2 o'clock in the morning, you would see him doing advertisements to send a Jew to Israel. And he was fundraising for this organization. What he would specifically say is, you can bring us closer to the fulfillment of biblical prophecy by helping someone move home. To date, that is still the language on their website. On their front page right now, it says, in 2025, the fellowship and its supporters helped fulfill biblical prophecy by bringing more than 6,000 people to their homeland. Their front page also says, God says supporting Israel is the most important thing we can do as Christians. And again, from a fundamentalist Christian perspective, they're not sending Jewish people to move to Israel because they know that they want to go and they hope they have a good life and the hummus is better over there, although it is. They are sending them there because, from their perspective, once all the Jewish people move to Israel and Israel expands to its full power, according to their interpretation of the Bible, then Jesus will come back, launch Armageddon, and then all of those people that they so lovingly sent to Israel will either be converted or be killed.
That's, again, gross.
It is really gross. It's almost too cynical to believe. It's just, and this has been going on explicitly since the 80s, this handshake agreement between Christian conservatives and the far right in Israel. Bibi Netanyahu is pictured and quoted on the front page of this organization. When I got off the plane in Israel the last time, the entire jetway into Ben Gurion was covered with advertisements for this group. And again, part of it is that the alliance serves both political goals, keeps the right wing in power. Evangelical Christians think they get Jesus coming back. Right-wing Israeli forces think they can convince us to do what they want and also stay in power and also get the Messiah to come once they expand and take over everything. And it's great. Both of them also think the minute they get what they want, the other side is going to die and dissolve into flames. Once the third temple is built, and the Messiah comes back and we all disappear, or once Jesus comes back and takes out all the heathen and everyone disappears. It's the worst impulses of two different groups of people playing off of each other. And so this is how we got where we are. Mike Huckabee gave an interview to Tucker Carlson a few weeks ago, where Tucker Carlson explicitly brought up Genesis 15 and said, if the promised land is everything from the Nile to the Euphrates, would you be okay with Israel just taking all that over? And Mike Huckabee said, sure, that's what God said. Netanyahu has on several occasions presented a map of what he calls Greater Israel, which is a term that floats around on the Israeli right wing, and it describes that larger chunk of land. And Netanyahu has tried for years to get the U.S. to join them in attacking Iran. He's been on this horse for years, and he finally got us to do it. But if you watch, the war so quickly spread to Lebanon and Syria. And Israel's been bombing Lebanon and southern Syria for a while now. And so all of a sudden, these surrounding countries are in free fall. And, suddenly we have a growing Israel-U.S. hegemony in the Middle East. Evangelical Christians are thrilled. Far-right Jews in Israel are excited. Everybody's convinced that they've achieved what they wanted. And everybody who's not them is going to be violently taken out just because they've been cynically using each other for 40-some years. So, like I said at the top, it is incredibly bad and cynical, and the worst of humanity is on display. War on its own is bad. War because two groups of confused religious people have decided they want God to wipe out everybody else is worse. And I want to point out that if nothing else, this shows us that how important understanding religious motivation is. I don't know if you remember, but right before 9/11, there were a lot of opinion theorists who were like, oh, no one's going to be religious anymore. Everyone is going to be enlightened and atheist and secular, and it's going to be great. And then, no, has not happened.
Not exactly.
Not exactly. So everyone who was like cheering the end of history needs to calm down and take a seat, because that backfired in a big way. And I also want to say, I cannot sort out the extremist government in Israel. That's not my lane. I can sort out conservative evangelical Christians in America. That's my lane. I can yell at them really well. There are a lot of amazing, incredible, faithful, progressive Jewish leaders who have been fighting this fight for longer than I've been alive. And they will continue to fight this fight. They inspire me every day, and I commend them to you. IfNotNow.org, Rabbi Danya, Trua, Rabbis for Human Rights, B'Tselem in Israel. All of these groups are working so hard to rectify the strands in their own tradition that have given strength to the kind of right-wing plague that they have to deal with, just like we have to deal with the issues in our own tradition. So just know that they're out there and they're working, and support them if you can. And for us as Christians, it is really important, I think, for us to own our part of what's happened. We don't get to say, oh, Israel made us do a war, and then just sort of walk away, because that is anti-Semitic. Like, they didn't do it with a mind trick. Like, the majority of the domestic support for Israel comes from conservative Christian voters. Poll after poll in the last 20 years has shown that more evangelical Christian voters unconditionally support the actions of the Israeli government than do American Jewish voters. That it's a much more important issue to them. We need to do a much, much better job of countering the sort of blind faith, unconditional support stuff that pressure groups like the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews puts out. Because at this point, ideas like the most important thing God wants us to do is support Israel, or as a Christian, I have to support Israel. These ideas have become so commonplace that a lot of times we don't know where they come from, and we just do them out of reflex, and it's not okay.
And it's also really important for us to remember that there is a really high human cost to all of this.
Yeah.
And when we look at it as it is only affecting one or possibly two groups of people, that's not at all the case. There are many different groups of people in this region that are being affected by this, right?
Yeah, this chunk of land is the fount of human diversity. This is where humanity started. This is where we all, in all of our diversity, come from. Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Hopefully, we're going to have a friend of mine on who is the Palestinian Anglican pastor of Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. Christianity is a Palestinian religion. It is a religion that is indigenous to the Middle East, and Palestinian Christians live there, have lived there, God willing, will continue to live there. You also have Druze, Zoroastrians, Mandeans. All of the beautiful diversity of humanity exists in this place. And when we talk about it as a war over chess pieces, or something where only one group of people really exist and the others are just objects that you can move around and disperse as you want to, that is horrific. That is absolutely unholy. Any religion that asks you to treat fellow human beings as something other than human, as a two-dimensional object that you get to move around a chessboard in order for something good or bad to happen to you, is not a religion at all. God wants us to see everyone as human, which we keep coming back to on this show. It is the cornerstone of faith, that we have to see one another as human, whether we live here, whether we live in Iran, no matter where someone lives, they are a human being that is beloved by God, created with inherent dignity, and we do not get to move them on a chessboard just because we want something to happen or fulfill a prophecy. That's not how any of this works.
It's a little bit of a violation of the first commandment, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You know, if we are called not to create idols, this is idol worship in and of itself. It is the idol worship of creating gods out of ourselves to do the work of God themselves. So in my opinion, it's wildly problematic. I think that you've done a good job of this. And listener, I hope that you are hearing this too. There is a lot of nuance and there are a lot of threads in this that really pull this together. And so I hope at no point in your listening to this are you taking from this that just because we are trying to bring to light some really difficult things that are happening here, that this is an attack on Judaism. This is not
Right.
an attack on Judaism. Assuming a position that opposes the idea of Zionism is not something that is anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish because, like you said, there are Jews who are Palestinians who are not Israelis per se. This is a much larger thing. So I hope that when you're hearing this, listeners, that you're not seeing it as an attack on something. It is really trying to open up and expand what it is that maybe we don't see because of our own perspective.
Right. And I want to be very clear. The Venn diagram between what is Israeli and what is Jewish are not entirely overlapping. There are Israeli Palestinians. There are Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. There are Jews who have citizenship all over the world. The actions and beliefs of the Israeli government in no way define Judaism as a whole. And to think that they do is bonkersville. I mean, for one thing, would anyone dare to say that the actions of Texas, because it claims to be a Christian state, define Christianity? Because I would burn a whole lot of things down if we said that. That's not okay. So I want to be really clear that Judaism, like Christianity, like Islam, like any religious tradition, has parts of it that don't deal with power well. And that's something that's human. No religious tradition is created to hold power over other people. That's not good for any of us. And that's not what religion is designed to do. All of us who are religious, one of our duties to ourselves and to each other, I think, is to take care of the ghosts in our attic. One of my heroes, Fareed Essek, who was a South African Muslim theologian who worked with Desmond Tutu against apartheid, described various religious traditions as houses in a neighborhood. And he said, I may like your house, I may come over and visit your house and eat your food, but my house is my home. That's how he conceived of interfaith dialogue. And I always envisioned sort of the worst zealots in each of our religious traditions as being the ghosts in the attic that we have to deal with, and the problems from our pasts in each religious tradition. We all have ghosts clanging around in that attic, and sometimes they get out and wreak havoc on our neighborhood. And it's our job and our responsibility to one another to take care of our own ghosts and to call up each other when we see the ghost getting out and saying, you want me to come help you? Because I know you got this, but I've had to deal with my own ghost, and it was a nightmare. I got you, man, but this isn't you. So, hi, everybody. I wanted to jump on and add something to what we recorded. Literally, while we were recording, there was an attack on a synagogue in West Bloomfield, Michigan. Thanks be to God, no one was killed, but the security guard was wounded. Clearly, an attack like this is against everything we know and are taught in the gospel. It is against every part of Christianity, and our thoughts and prayers continue to be with those who are affected and those who live with fear. I forgot to say something that I want to make absolutely crystal clear. One of the best ways we can stand against the war in the Middle East, one of the best ways we can create the world that we want, is by fighting hatred and anti-Semitism here, in our own communities. One of the reasons Theodor Herzl and his friends back in the 19th century sought to create a homeland of their own where they could be safe was because of the virulent anti-Semitism they saw around them. And that anti-Semitism has not disappeared. It has not been solved by the creation of Israel. It has not been solved by wars. It has not been solved by violence of any kind. The only thing that will defeat anti-Semitism or hatred or bigotry of any kind is when each of us stand together in solidarity against hatred. The thing that will stop wars like what we're seeing in the Middle East is when each of us make our own neighborhoods a safe place for every single person. When each of us make this land, the United States, and wherever you live, a safe place for people of all faiths. That is the way that we can fight against the sort of bigotry and hatred that has infected our world is when we choose to stand together in our God-given diversity and honor the dignity of every human being. That is the only way forward. I refuse to believe that the best future for humankind is a series of walled-off ethno-states fighting each other to the death to see which one is strongest and will survive. I want to believe, and I believe that God wants us to have a world where everyone gets to live together, rejoicing in one another's uniqueness and diversity in our different gifts and talents that we bring together to the tapestry that God has called humanity. So I wanted to make that absolutely clear so that as we continue together in this pretty much bummer of a world, you may share with me the hope that one day we will learn how to live together as brothers and sisters.
So I know after a conversation like this, it's hard to kind of reorient on something that may be a little flippant. But we always need to do a check-in with you, Megan, because you are the rector of the For the Rest of Us community. And instead of getting your recommendation for something, what I need to do, because this is important, we have talked about this on the show before, and it is that time of year, friends, whether you remember it or not, we are in the throes of Lent madness as we speak. And we wanted to check in and see how your Lent madness is going so far.
Everybody's lost. Martin Luther is competing today. So my other two were Amy Carmichael, lost, and Saint Scholastica, lost.
Wait, Scholastica's out?
Yeah. She only had one big miracle, and that was telling her brother he was an idiot and causing a thunderstorm.
Well,
because he was an idiot. Which I sympathize with as an older sister to a occasionally irritating younger brother. It's a lot to build a sainthood around. But Martin Luther is up today against Richard Hooker, and I don't think he's going to pull through. Last I checked, we were only less than 20 votes apart, but I don't think he's going to be able to score a comeback.
Ugh, disappointing. There's nothing worse than a bracket busted in Lent madness.
Yep. I never win.
Well, it was a noble effort. You know, it's every year, whether it's Lent madness or March madness, there's always a Cinderella story, but they can't always go all the way. So we will look for the update on how Martin Luther did in our next episode. Hey, friends, thank you so much. I know that this was a heck of a ride this week, but we really hope that this said something to you. If you found something helpful in this episode, do us a favor like you always do on your way out the door. Make sure you've hit the subscribe button, leave us a comment, let us know what you're thinking, share it with a friend, and we can't wait to talk to you next time on For the Rest of Us. Thanks for stopping by and checking out For the Rest of Us. If you like the show, leave us a review and a rating. Make sure to subscribe and share it with a friend. We hope to see you again next time. For the Rest of Us is a production of the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York.